Good morning and welcome to day number two, video lecture number two for our course. Today I'm in the general classroom building in a conference room on the second floor that I love very much because it has a beautiful view of Pikes Peak, which we can't see today because of the fires that have ravaged our state recently, but also because I'm a bit of an old school guy and I still like to write on things, so I wanted to make sure I was in a classroom or a space today that had a whiteboard so I could go over some key concepts and terms that are important for you to understand moving forward with this class. So with that being said, let's begin with the title of our course, which is Rhetoric and Writing. Before I begin, today's lecture is a good opportunity to take notes if you want to do so. These keywords and terms I expect you to know going into Friday's class, and we will have a quiz. Don't worry, it's not a big deal as long as you watch today's lecture and do the reading leading into Friday. But we will have a quiz on Friday, and part of the quiz will be you demonstrating your understanding of these concepts and terms that I go over with you in class today. Excuse me. So let's begin with the word rhetoric. First of all, please avoid looking up some of these words and terms online because what happens is when you look up these words and terms online, you tend to get a broad definition of that particular word. And some of these words and terms that we'll come across in this class have a more specific definition as it relates to our writing and the way that we apply it in this particular class. So I'm going to break down these words and terms in a more specific way as it relates to this course and try not to use the more broad definitions that you might come across in a dictionary or online. So first word up at the top we have rhetoric. And to keep that simple for today as it applies to this class, rhetoric is simply persuasive language, verbal and written. So as far as the definition of that term goes, in this class, we will be analyzing persuasive language, specifically speeches, articles, and going into next week, we will read chapters from a book that presents a specific argument where the writer utilizes the rhetorical strategies that you see on the board behind me. So rhetoric, to keep it simple, is persuasive language. Now, Aristotle is given credit for breaking arguments down into three rhetorical appeals and strategies that writers and speakers typically use to persuade their audience. And I'm sure you guys in your previous English courses are familiar with these terms or have at least been exposed to them. So today might be a refresher for some of you. But again, feel free to take notes as I break down these terms, this vocab on the board, as it will be important to you doing well on your quiz for Friday. So again, Aristotle is giving credit for breaking arguments, persuasive language down into three strategies and appeals. And those are rhetorical appeals to ethos, logos, and pathos. Pathos. Now, back to what I said earlier, when you look up some of these terms online, you'll get a more broad definition. So I want to keep these definitions specific, simple, and to the point as they apply to you doing rhetorical analysis in this class. And as far as your writing is concerned, that's what you can expect to do for the duration of the course, is you will be doing rhetorical analysis. Your major writing assignments will be analytical papers where you focus on the effectiveness of the rhetorical strategies and appeals implemented by writers in either their speech or their written work. So the first appeal that we have is ethos. And again, this is one of those terms that students tend to get confused about because they see the base, the root of that word ethos, and assume that it has to do with ethics and values, which it does to a certain extent. But for this class, I want you to think of ethos in terms of a writer or speaker's credibility and character. So as you know, or as I'm sure you're familiar with, oftentimes writers, speakers, in attempting to persuade their audience, what they will often do is establish their credibility first, or they will express their upstanding character to try to convince an audience that they're worth listening to in the first place, or that they have a certain credibility with the subject matter or the topic that they're speaking or writing about. Now, we see this everywhere. Currently, we will see it leading up to the election, as already both supporters of Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden are already attacking the character and the credibility of both candidates. And this is definitely a part of our everyday lives and the world that surrounds us, is that for us as human beings, credibility, a person's character matter. They are important to us, especially in terms of argument and trying to convey a message to an audience. For many of us, a person's message will never get across or reach us if we don't respect their credibility or character in the first place. So, credibility, character of the writer, the speaker are important. And oftentimes, writers and speakers will go out of their way to establish their character or their credibility first before they even begin to make an argument or persuade an audience. Okay? So, ethos, think in terms of credibility and character. Logos appeal we can keep simple for today in terms of reasoning, logic, and to go along with that, something that my boss is big on, as he is an expert in rhetoric, he always goes out of his way to tell us as English professors, as rhetoric professors, to make sure our students understand that part of logos appeal and part of the logos strategy is the text itself or the speech itself. In other words, is the speech or the text well organized? Is it coherent? Is it structured in a way where the argument is getting across in a clear and consistent manner to the audience so they're better able to digest whatever that argument or claim may be? So, logos appeal um, definitely is rooted in reasoning and logic, but it also applies to the text or the speech itself. And again, is it structured well? Is it coherent? And some specific aspects of logos appeal that, again, I'm sure many of you are familiar with are facts, are studies, are statistics, which should be very much rooted in truth, in logic, in reasoning. And you often see speakers, writers relying heavily on logos appeal because it's so convincing and impactful for an audience. Um, Again, going back to us as human beings, we are very much truth seekers. We appreciate facts, logic, and reasoning, especially when it's structured well in a coherent and persuasive speech or argument. So, those are all aspects of logos appeal and the rhetorical strategy appealing to logos that writers and speakers often employ. The last rhetorical appeal is appeal to pathos or pathos. And this, again, I think we are probably most familiar with, or it's the easiest to identify because these will be the emotional appeals that writers and speakers employ to connect with an audience. And so that's something I'd like you to understand outside of just pathos referring to emotional appeals, to metaphors, to analogies, to emotional language that comes from the heart is pathos appeal is also anytime a speaker or writer tries to connect with an audience in general. So it doesn't always have to be so emotional. It's just trying to convey your material in a relatable way where the audience can connect with it as individuals, as human beings. And again, going back to us as human beings, we're very much driven by emotion. Appeals to pathos have a very effective impact on us connecting with a particular writer or speaker. Me personally, I'm very emotional person, so I'm very much persuaded and convinced by strong appeals to pathos when they're implemented effectively by writers and speakers. So that's a little overview of these concepts and terms as they apply to this course. The the idea here is not that I necessarily want you guys to be using these terms and vocab in your writing constantly. I just want you to understand these terms and concepts as they allow you to analyze and break down a particular argument, a particular article, or a particular speech, or as we go into next week, the particular book that we're reading, which each chapter is going to present a specific argument. And your responsibility as a writer is to understand, first of all, the argument, the claims that are being made, and second, how the writers and speakers that we study are using rhetorical strategies and appeals to support and to reinforce those arguments. So, rhetorical analysis essentially is you arguing and writing about how effective the rhetorical appeals and strategies that writers are using. And you can argue for these rhetorical appeals and strategies being effective just as much as you can be critical and argue as a writer or speaker's strategies being ineffective, which you have the opportunity to do in this class. You don't have to agree with everything that we read. In fact, I want you to challenge and to critique everything that we read, and that's a big part of this class as well. So keep that in mind. We don't have to agree with everything that we come across in this class. I want you to be critical. I encourage you to critique authors, speakers, strategies, rhetorical appeals as we come across them in this class. Okay? Now, on to your reading assignment for Friday. Leading into Friday's class and Friday's quiz, you are to read only the introduction of They Say, I Say, just the introduction. And the introduction gives us a concept and understanding of how we respond to the material that we come across in this class and how we can respond through our own writing. And in the introduction, the way they refer to it as is entering the conversation. So I just want to highlight a couple of passages from the intro that you'll read leading into Friday. According to our authors, to make an impact as a writer, you need to do more than make statements that are logical, well supported, and consistent. You must also find a way of entering into the conversation with the views of others with something they say. The easiest and most common way writers do this is by summarizing what others say and then using it to set up what they want to say. So, the way I think of it is in a rhetorical analysis, and many of your analytical and academic papers you write in classes across the board as a college student. Essentially, what you're doing as a writer is you're weaving in and out of what other experts have to say about the particular topic or text or focus that you're writing about. We do this. You guys have practiced this leading up to this particular course, I'm sure, in other English classes, and there's an art to it. It's leading into a quote and then following that quote up with your analysis in this case, as it will apply to this class. So, another passage I'd like to highlight is, according to our authors again, the answer is that if you don't identify the they say you're responding to, your argument probably won't have a point. Readers will wonder what prompted you to say what you're saying and therefore motivated you to write.